here at Bramber Castle. This is one of my favorite places in West Sussex. I used to drive past this all the time when I lived in East Sussex. People said, oh, don't bother going, there's not much here because it's a ruin. And then I moved over to West Sussex and very quickly thought, I have to check it out. And it's become one of my favorite places, someplace I would walk the dogs several times a week. It's an amazing place. There's not much left of the castle itself, but what is here is really something to see. And it's just such a wonderful place, so relaxing and so interesting to wander around. And often there's very few people here, so you can do it at your own leisure. So we're going to take a look around and try and explore a number of key things that it tells us. In particular, it tells us a lot about that early stage of the Norman invasion, of why castles like this were built. This is known as a Motte and Bailey castle, which was the type of castle which was used by the Normans when they came in. It's what allowed them to control and dominate England after 1066. Bramber Castle was founded by William de Braose in 1073, just shortly after the Norman conquest. It was set up as a military and administrative centre situated on the Adur Valley in between the port of Shoreham, which was very important in the Middle Ages, and the market town of Steyning, which became a very wealthy centre of trade. It was held by the de Braose family until 1450 and was an important administrative and military centre. We know very little about its history, but there were a few key events which did happen. We know, for example, that one of the descendants of the original builder, William, was suspected of disloyalty to King John in the early 13th century. King John demanded two of his sons as hostages, but when Lady de Braose refused, the castle was confiscated and the family was captured. Lady de Braose and her sons were imprisoned at Windsor Castle, where they would die of starvation. It was this and other similar heavy-handed acts by King John which led to him being forced to sign Magna Carta. So we've got this castle connected to some pretty important events in British history. There is very little left of it now, with just one great piece of wall from the keep standing guard at 14 meters high. Gives you some sense for how grand it must have been in its heyday. But despite the fact that there's not a lot left of it, we can learn a great deal. Well, first of all, it is a very good example of the type of castle built by the Normans after the conquest. These were known as Motte and Bailey castles. Motte Bailey castles are very special to me, very special in many ways, because they are what allowed the Normans to be successful. It was extremely important because it could be built very quickly, despite the fact that some of them are of quite a size. What you had was very simple. The Normans would take, usually, sometimes on flat ground, but normally would take an existing hill, a natural structure, a natural hill, and they would then modify it. So one, you create a curtain wall. So they would put a wall around the top of the slope, and then the enclosure inside that is known as the bailey. It's the open area. And this is where you would have all sorts of structures, kitchens, places for archery, blacksmith shops, all these kind of things, and housing. And then in the middle of this, or within it, you would have the motte. This is a man-made hill. And sometimes they would use some natural element of a hill, but quite often it was built by hand. They would dig a ditch to make a moat, and then use the soil that came out of that ditch to build a cone-shaped hill. And then on top of the hill, they would build the keep. Originally, this was always of wood, or almost always of wood, because this is something that could be put up very quickly. And then as they solidified their position and things calmed down after the conquest, they could then build with stone. So we see this at Bramber in a very effective way. The ditches and the motte are still in existence, although the motte today is covered in trees, as are the slopes of the main bit of the hill and the ditches. But you still get a really good sense of what it must have looked like and the amount of work that went into it to create this important center, which was going to dominate the region, dominate the Adur Valley and the trade that would go in and out from the coast inland. So you can see behind me that the ditch that surrounds the castle, the natural hill which it was built on, incredibly defensive position, dug by hand, so you'd come down one bank and then have to go up the next. Incredibly difficult thing to do, particularly, of course, there wouldn't have been any trees or roots sticking out, and you would have had a hard climb. So to prove just how difficult this would have been, I'll try and climb up the side. And again, remember, there's no trees and things to grab a hold of. And so they would have had a very difficult time. And they're not wearing good hikers. So after going over a bank, through a ditch, up this incredibly steep hill, you then find yourself up against this very large curtain wall, which you would have to get over or through somehow. And this is all at the time when people, of course, are going to be throwing everything at you, arrows, javelins, rocks, whatever. You're going to have to get through that. Then you get across the curtain wall, you're into the bailey. You're going to have to cross this open space and then up the motte and attack the keep that sits on top. So this is an incredibly strong defensive position. Huge amount of time and energy went into building this. And what this tells us is that defense was first and foremost in the minds of the Normans in the post-1066 era. They had to think about how are they going to establish administrative centers, military centers, which are going to protect them from all those angry Anglo-Saxons that are living amongst them. And so this was the key thing that we learned from this. There's not much left here, only a few little structures, bits of the curtain wall, but it is an absolute amazing place, and the work that went into the ditches in particular really tell us just how important that defense was in the post-1066 era.